Before we really jump in, I just wanted to show you guys a quick outline and kind of talk about why I decided to do this session. So when I was thinking about what to submit for the Women's Forum and kind of what I would like to see, I really considered what information that I could provide as a counselor that might be really useful for you guys to know and that people might not already have. And so what I settled on is educating about mental health, wellness, and also interpersonal violence. These are three areas that we often don't really learn about or know how to cope with until we are in the thick of it and absolutely need that information. So I wanted to be able to equip you all with how to cope, kind of how to spot signs and symptoms and support one another, because unfortunately these are facts of life and these are really important things that I feel everyone should know about or be able to educate others about. So these tips or tricks that we're going to talk about today can be utilized for yourself or to share with friends, family, coworkers, whoever you might feel like you need to support. Especially now, it's more important than ever that we really focus on looking out for one another. And so also before we get into it, I did want to give a quick trigger warning for some of you. We're going to be talking about mental illness today. We're going to be talking about interpersonal violence. That's kind of a fancy word. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, that's abusive relationships and that type of trauma and abuse. So if that's something that may be upsetting for you, I just wanted to put that on the table. Please take care of yourselves and be gentle to yourselves. It is important to know, but it is also some heavier information at times. So I'll go through some general tips for mental health and wellness, how that can be applied to the workplace. As Amanda and I are career counselors, we kind of talk about that a lot. And then go through anxiety and depression, two very common mental health concerns that we see popping up a lot, both in our clients and in general. And then talking about interpersonal violence and some local resources that we may be able to make use of. I'm aware that a lot of us, if not all of us, are probably local to Lexington. So we wanted to give you some more specifics on how this information might be applied from where you are. Okay, perfect. And then also, before I kind of jump into everything, I did just want to clarify a couple of points. These are just common misconceptions that I see or things that people probably don't know if they're not trained in counseling. So you can experience symptoms of a mental health disorder without actually being clinically diagnosable for that disorder. So for example, if you're in a dangerous or stressful situation, it's pretty likely you may feel anxiety or panic, without necessarily having generalized anxiety disorder. However, there's a difference between that and me sitting in my office, eating lunch and suddenly starting to feel anxious, right? So sometimes these symptoms are our body's natural reactions to things and can be adaptive or helpful. But also it's important to know how to cope with them, whether you are in danger or if you're just eating lunch in your office experiencing anxiety. Body doesn't quite discriminate, it still feels the same, and we can still try to cope with them in the same ways, right? And so kind of hand in hand with that, a huge part in receiving a mental health diagnosis is that your symptoms interfere with your ability to function in everyday life. That's what makes something abnormal. So again, whether these symptoms are abnormal, kind of interfering with your daily functioning, or if they are, again, warranted if you're in a dangerous or traumatic situation, we're here to give you tips to help navigate that either way. And then one more point that I will probably be referring back to throughout this presentation is that mental health and mental illness in particular is not a logical thing. I really encourage you all to try not to apply your judgment or your rational logic to the situation of someone who may be in the midst of mental health difficulties. Mental illness is a lot easier to understand and work with when you accept that for some things, there just is not a rational explanation. So keeping those in mind, I thought we'd start off more generally with just some tips for mental wellness that we could all benefit from, whether we are experiencing some mental illness concerns or just navigating the highs and lows of life, right? So one thing that I always advocate for is self-awareness. This can help us to find the source of our feelings if we're experiencing something we're not quite sure about. It can help us identify the things that cause us to be upset, find ways of coping that really work well for us, and help us to even realize when we're maybe not functioning normally or going through more than we think we are. And with that kind of, if a negative feeling or situation does arise, I encourage you to sit in it and practice being mindful of it. feel the sensations in your body, what thoughts are going through your head, maybe even try to trace that back to the source. What caused this to come up for me? Knowing how to sit with these uncomfortable feelings and cope with them the best way that you cope is a really important skill to have, I think. And sometimes the only way out really is through. And so kind of with that self-awareness, I really encourage you all to practice identifying and setting boundaries that maximize your mental wellness. So if you're aware of the ways that you function best or certain situations that might cause undue stress or anxiety for you, attempt to avoid those or really enforce those boundaries that will ensure that you're able to function at your best. And again, maximize that mental wellness. This can look like not taking on too much overtime if you find that's really taxing for you, not working nights because sleep is really important for your mental health, setting aside time in your day to do self-care or to take part in activities that really bring you joy and balance in your life. These things are all very important, both in work-life balance and beyond. So I encourage you to pay more attention to what boundaries we may be able to set to really maximize health and wellness in that regard. And generally, if someone does come to you with a difficult situation or a mental health concern, one thing that I've really learned as a counselor is that listening can be just as impactful for problem solving. And it is really helpful to know kind of what someone's needs are if they're coming to you for support with something. You don't have to know all of the answers. Sometimes just being a listening ear, being supportive is enough. And one phrase that I find is really helpful to kind of determine where someone's at with this. Do you want me to just listen, or would you like me to help you find solutions for this? And sometimes people might not know the answer to that, and that's okay. But I always find it's good to check in because sometimes really listening goes such a long way, particularly in situations where, again, you may not have the answers for them. Right. So taking a look at the workplace, which is, again, an area that Amanda and I work in quite frequently, 1 in 5 Americans suffer from some form of mental illness. So thinking about how many people are in an office space or other type of workplace, it's very likely that you work with someone who may struggle with mental illness. So these are just some tips to kind of make the workplace more hospitable to working with mental illness. It doesn't have to be a disability or a deficiency. So I just wanted to include these to kind of look at that, because the workplace can be a stressful environment and really cause exacerbate some concerns that you may be experiencing, right? So one thing that we see semi-frequently is this air of toxic positivity. So some workplaces really push on you that only positive emotions are acceptable to express at work. And this really is not a healthy way to frame things. We're all human beings. We all experience the highs and lows of life. And it isn't healthy to feel pressure to only express or embody these positive emotions at work all the time. It's important to grow comfortable with experiencing the full range of human emotion and learning when you might have too much on your plate, when you may need to take a break or decompress. Sometimes that's not possible in every single workplace. And that's why we also encourage you to figure out how to best cope with these days where maybe the positivity just isn't shining through, and that is absolutely okay. What's important, again, is that self-awareness or keeping up with your own bandwidth and making sure that you're not trying to impose this false or toxic positivity on yourself when maybe that's just not how things are going today. And then kind of within the realm of more clinically diagnosable mental illness, businesses with 15 or more employees are legally required to provide reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So mental illness can qualify as a disability under this act. And you may be able to ask leadership for things such as time off or schedule restructuring in order to attend therapy appointments, modified work hours to really accommodate what's going on with you. And this, again, depends on your region, both resource-wise and legal protections, but certainly something looking into if you do find that mental health concerns may be interfering with your work performance. And then if you feel like you need to go to talk with your superiors about getting accommodations for mental health concerns, I recommend that you try to seek input from close friends or family to gain better understanding of what's been going on with you. Sometimes if you are in the grips of a mental health struggle, it can be really difficult to see the big picture of what's going on or even effectively problem solve. Because again, mental illness is not logical, and sometimes it can take you down some really unhealthy thought patterns, right? So input can be important from a very trusted source to see more clearly how you are affected by your illness, how others might see that effects, and then also to help you brainstorm better solutions for how you can bring this up to your superiors and get the accommodations that you need. So with that, I do recommend to come in with a list of solutions tailored to your needs. Help them to help you. It's less work on their end, and certainly then you can get more specifically what you ask for and what you need in order for this to not be a significant obstacle to your health or wellness, right? Okay, so now we're going to talk more specifically about mental illness. And as I mentioned, this will be anxiety and depression. They're two of the most common that we see, so that's what I'll be discussing today. That's not to say that other disorders are not valid or not worthy of our time. We are just limited to 50 minutes. So we'll start off with anxiety, and that is the most common mental health concern in the United States. So sometimes, as I kind of mentioned earlier as well, anxiety symptoms can be triggered by a stressful event. Anxiety is an adaptive response that helps your body to really get riled up if something is going on that may require your attention, your action, right? But other times, the system of riling your system up, right, can get a little dysregulated. You can start to experience anxiety when you're sitting down for dinner. There's no discernible problem going on. And yes, Amanda, absolutely. COVID-related anxiety is huge in the field right now. And again, these things can come on for life or death situations or lesser things, right? So some common emotional symptoms that you may experience are feelings of dread or apprehension. You just feel like something's wrong. Restlessness, feeling really jumpy or tense. You can't relax or be present. Anticipating the worst outcome or having just the sense of danger, like something's going on. And then physical symptoms that may accompany these common emotional symptoms are racing heartbeat, shortness of breath. So you may see like media depictions of people experiencing anxiety, really hyperventilating and breathing very quickly, sweating, tremors, or twitching. Your body's in this super aroused state and it needs somewhere to take this energy. So people may jiggle their legs, move around, can't sit still, that type of thing. And then insomnia or fatigue. So just because you're tired doesn't mean that you're not anxious, right? It can affect our body in a lot of different ways. A lot of problematic ways as well, right? We can go to the next slide, Amanda. Beautiful. So with this, some coping resources that I want to provide you all with. And this is something that I will probably brush up on again a couple times in this presentation, is the crisis text hotline. It is a crisis line that I myself have volunteered with, and I cannot recommend enough. Counselors on this crisis line are trained to talk you through and de-escalate emotionally hot situations, which includes moments of acute anxiety or panic. They can also connect you with resources such as breathing GIFs, meditations, YouTube videos, things that can help you to de-escalate this really anxious state. And they are available 24/7, accessible through texting home to the number 741-741. I really can't recommend this resource enough. It's not a permanent fix or a replacement for therapy, but it is so useful when you're in just a really hot moment and need a neutral sounding board to help de-escalate. Another thing that I recommend is practicing grounding techniques. So this is based in mindfulness techniques, as a lot of self-initiated anxiety treatments are. And one common grounding technique, as you guys can kind of see here, is looking around the space that you're in and naming 5 things you can see, 4 that you can touch, 3 that you can hear, 2 that you can smell, and 1 that you can taste. This kind of helps to break you out of that spiral of anxious thoughts and feelings and stay more mindful and present in your environment, which can often help to kind of de-escalate and calm things down for you. Another mindfulness related technique that I do recommend is practicing box breathing or other types of breathing on a count. And if you have a smartphone or a computer nearby, you can access GIFs or YouTube videos to kind of guide you through this. I find that this also helps your body to kind of reach a state of cooler calm, and focusing on the physical experience of that breath can really, again, help to break that thought cycle of escalating. Everything is wrong. This is stressful. This is scary. I know I've been there, and these things are certainly helpful for me. And then another tip that I find kind of interesting is chewing on ice, taking a walk, or really involving your senses. This is offering an alternative source of stimuli, basically, to, again, break you out of this cycle and kind of make your body go, oh, wait, we aren't in danger. This isn't really happening. And also, a lot these things are things that you can control, which can help with that anxiety sense of everything's going wrong and I can't stop it, right? So interestingly, sometimes shocking your nervous system through something like, this sounds silly, but dunking your face in like ice water can halt that physical cascade of anxiety symptoms. And that shock to your system actually like physiologically helps your body to start cooling you down. So involving the senses and these cognitive mindfulness techniques can be very helpful if you or someone near you is experiencing a moment of anxiety. Okay, now on to depression. And I would like to clarify with this slide, we all may be aware, but depression is different than simply feeling sad. It is a neurochemical imbalance, and it can be very, very difficult and devastating to deal with. And additionally, some people may experience what we would call a depressive episode, so the symptoms of depression, without necessarily qualifying for a clinical diagnosis. So a big factor in a lot of diagnoses is the amount of time that you're experiencing these episodes. You can have an episode without necessarily being diagnosable, but either way, therapy is a good resource to deal with that. And then common symptoms of depression may look like changes in appetite or sleep patterns, the loss of ability to focus, a loss of energy, a lack of interest in activities that used to be enjoyable for you, feelings of hopelessness or guilt. This can even manifest in physical aches and pains. And last, but certainly not least, thoughts of suicide. So some of these symptoms and others, if you are trying to care for your colleagues or your friends, this can look like dramatic weight loss or gain. For me, I know as a graduate student and having gone through college, this can look like napping a lot or staying up at odd hours of the night, which are behaviors that are pretty common in a college environment, just given all that's going on, but it is important to watch out for these things as they could also be symptoms of mental illness. This could look like moving slowly or being super lethargic, or generally just changes in daily routines, hobbies, or patterns. And so I also want to make really clear, I know suicide is a very serious topic. I could spend at least an hour talking about it. Again, we have time constraints, so I'm only going to cover it briefly here. But depression and suicidality are due to mental illness. And this is something that's often illogical and inexplicable. I know the why question gets thrown around a lot in these circumstances. But again, I encourage you guys to really think about it is impossible to apply a healthy mind's logical assessment to mental illness cognitions. So in the realm of suicide prevention and treatment, I was fortunate enough to attend a QPR training, which stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. I would highly recommend that to you all. Again, it's just useful information to have. You can throw it on your CV or resume. It always looks good. And I think this information should be more readily available to combat the stigma behind depression and suicidality that can often stop people from seeking out treatment. So obviously, I'm not qualified to give you the whole QPR training here, but the main tenets of that are to question. So if you suspect that someone close to you is considering suicide, you need to be direct in your language. If you kind of dance around the suicide word or language that directly refers to that, that gives them the opportunity to not fully share with you what's going on. It's uncomfortable, and I absolutely recognize and validate that, but it is necessary for you to say, are you having thoughts of suicide, or really directly address that. And thank you for posting that QPR link, because yes, again, I highly recommend that to you all. And while you're questioning, also express caring and concern for that person. Obviously, you're reaching out because you're concerned, and support is very, very important in these situations. And with that, persuade, right? Offer them support and hope, and then refer. So connect them to resources to get treatment. And we'll talk a little bit more about local resources later. But I do also want to say, especially when this is with coworkers or people you're not as close to, but you are picking up on these signs or symptoms, you may not always be in a position where it is comfortable or appropriate for you to exercise this QPR training. If you feel like you know someone that may be better suited, it's okay to approach a closer friend for this if you've seen the warning signs, but you feel like the message may come across better from them. I definitely always say it is better safe than sorry in these situations. They are uncomfortable, but depression is very treatable, and getting people connected to resources and support is of utmost importance here. So speaking of coping and resources, again, I recommend if someone or you yourself are in a depressive episode, texting the crisis line can be very helpful. Crisis counselors are trained to risk assess for suicide and de-escalate emergency situations. They can even connect people with emergency services if the situation is so dire. Again, this is not a substitute for regular therapy, but it can be very helpful, particularly the text format. You can reach them from anywhere, and it's less invasive than a phone call can feel for some. So I do recommend this resource. For mild to moderate symptoms of depression, exercise, yoga, or other physical activities can help with prevention through endorphins, right? Those are very useful for that brain chemical imbalance, as well as being able to work towards a fitness goal can maybe offer a sense of hope, or attending exercise classes, a sense of community, which can help again with those mild to moderate depression symptoms. With that sense of community, support groups offer a safe space to learn coping strategies, share experiences, and feel less alone. There's a wide variety of support groups out there in a wide variety of formats. So some may just be an online forum, some may meet in person monthly, weekly, whatever it may be. But there are a lot of resources in that vein available, and they are all very helpful. And then I know that conventional therapy or counseling can sometimes seem really daunting or cost prohibitive. There are virtual options like Talkspace or Cerebral available that may be a little bit less expensive than attending in-person therapy sessions, and also quicker to access in some cases. Or some low-cost alternatives could be available through a university you may be connected with, or your workplace. I know that I work on breaks at Target, and they offer, I believe, connection with one of the online mental health counseling services, but I only work part-time and that's available to me. So always look into your resources. You'd be surprised what's out there. And there are a lot of really awesome organizations and people working to ensure that counseling is accessible for more people. So I do recommend doing some Googling for yourself or your friends. It never hurt, absolutely. All right, so now we're going to shift to talking about interpersonal violence. Again, when I say this, I'm talking about relationship abuse. And this is good information to have because you never know when you might need it, or you may need to educate a friend or people around you. I wanted to include this in the interest of taking care of yourself and others, kind of thinking about the title of this session and the theme. And also given that this is an event typically mostly aimed towards women, and unfortunately interpersonal violence does affect more women than men. So I think this is information that is very good to have on deck. So as I was saying, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will experience severe intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So although it affects women at a higher rate than men, men are not excluded from being affected by interpersonal violence. I think this is important to keep in mind, certainly. However, these signs and symptoms may manifest slightly differently. Again, very subjective, case by case, but important to note that it's not just a women's issue. And kind of with this, like the full spectrum of the experience, physical and psychological abuse often go hand in hand here. So I've included some typical abuse behaviors, both emotional and physical here. I'm not going to read through the entire list, but I do want to bring your attention to just a couple within these. So gaslighting is a term that is often thrown around, but people may not know what it means. And essentially, gaslighting is making someone question their own sanity. So saying things like, you sound crazy right now, you're overreacting, or I never said that. Essentially, what it is causing you to doubt your perceptions of not only what happened, the event in question, but your own reactions to the event. So this can pretty obviously be very damaging. Another one I wanted to point out here under the physical abuse column, a lot of times when people think of physical abuse, they think of simply physical violence. But the preventing you from eating, sleeping, or getting medical care is also considered physical abuse. Preventing you from getting your physical needs met can be an act of abuse. And all of these behaviors are about exercising control over another person. And in this case, the person that you are in a relationship with. But again, abuse behaviors can exist in all sorts of different types of relationships. We can look out for warning signs, and certainly I know that I try to always, but it isn't always obvious. I do just want to say abusers are often very good at keeping things under wraps, and victims are often very ashamed to come forward about their experiences, or they're experiencing so much dissonance from the gaslighting and manipulation that it's difficult to come to terms with what's happening to them. So it's important to know these signs and symptoms, but again, sometimes they're not obvious or they're harder to pick up on than you may think. So then talking about how this may show up in the workplace, it often seeps into all aspects of our life. And unfortunately, work is not exempt from that, right? So an estimated 18,700 incidences of workplace violence in the United States per year are related to domestic or dating violence. If you suspect that a coworker of yours may be experiencing abuse, certainly endeavor to make the workplace a supportive and non-judgmental environment. Through being supportive and open like this, you can make sure that your coworker is fully comfortable disclosing their abuse or asking you for help. But I do want to emphasize, never pressure them. Be clear that you're willing to help them if they need you. But work, again, may not be the best place to have a serious conversation or to intervene more directly, just depending on the nature of your relationship with them. Here are some common signs that you may see in the workplace that a coworker may be in an abusive relationship. This could look like unannounced, disruptive, or frequent phone calls, emails, text messages, or visits from their partner. Experiencing intense startle reactions that may seem unwarranted just given the circumstances. Frequent headaches, abdominal pains, or other non-specific medical complaints that they may have. Wardrobe changes or visible signs of physical injury. So if you notice they're endeavoring to cover a certain area or dressing maybe in a way that's out of character for them, this could be an attempt to cover up the bruises or abrasions that may indicate they're experiencing physical abuse. One thing that I've been seeing a bit more frequently that I think is helpful is posting signs or resources in, for example, the women's bathroom or other spaces that are more private. So even if you cannot help a coworker directly, being able to provide them with the tools to help themselves can also be really helpful and protect their privacy if you feel like you're not in a situation where you're comfortable directly reaching out and helping them, right? We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So more specifically about supporting a friend or coworker who you may suspect is in an abusive relationship. Victims are in the most danger when they're attempting to leave an abusive situation. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. From the outside, it's really easy to think, well, they just need to get out of there immediately. I need to help them. Like, let's leave them tonight. Let's do it. But sometimes this isn't the best option, particularly when pets, children, or other people are involved here. Sometimes it takes time and safety planning to help a victim. So always defer to them and what they think is best. And also, this is a difficult part of this, but they may not always be receptive to what you're saying. if you do come to them and say, I think that your partner is exhibiting abusive behaviors towards you, or kind of, even if you come to them with compassion and support, this is a really difficult thing to grapple with or wrap your head around if you haven't fully processed the reality of your situation. A lot of times the amount of manipulation is so profound that it's really difficult to see things clearly and to realize that you are in fact being abused, or abusers commonly tear down the self-esteem of their victims in a way that makes them think that they don't deserve better treatment. So this can be a very difficult thing. And they may not always be initially receptive to what you're saying, or that you want to help them leave, right? So I do want to emphasize that just because they're not initially receptive, if this is an event that you ever do have to deal with, that doesn't mean that they never will be. I highly, highly recommend that you stay present in their life and keep communication open so that they are comfortable coming to you in the situation where they do want to leave. Support is a huge key here, because oftentimes abusers will attempt to isolate their victims from their support system, especially if their support system is someone that says that they should leave the relationship. So making sure that you are a constant and supportive presence is huge in helping victims, even if it doesn't feel like the most that you can do, right? So again, I want to emphasize to respect their boundaries and what they need to stay well. Leaving is very dangerous, so don't pressure them or assume that you know what's best as an outside perspective. They need to make that decision, keeping their own well-being in mind, and your job is to support them however they may need you. And so, again, these situations are dangerous and can sometimes escalate to be very dangerous very quickly. So in certain situations where it is very dangerous, it is okay to seek outside help. 911 is available for life-threatening or imminent risk situations if someone is actively being physically hurt. That type of really dangerous, horrible thing, 911 is absolutely acceptable here. In less dangerous situations, but if you see things escalating, or if you think that you do need to go for outside help, you can contact a legal aid, a therapist, or if it's a workplace situation, maybe a trusted supervisor. A lot of times these entities are trained how to handle these situations with privacy and safety in mind. So contacting outside resources is never going to be a hurtful thing. Just again, make sure that you maintain the victim's privacy and respect their wishes when it comes to leaving these situations or helping them leave.
It's fantastic, Grace. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about some resources that are available specifically to our UK community of employees that are online. I'm curious if you all have taken advantage of work life and well-being over in HR's great offerings. You're able to connect one-on-one at no cost with therapists that are in a variety of different specialists, mental health therapists. I'll give a shout out to Annie Bissoni. I worked with her. I've worked with her a few times since I joined UK for support. But early in COVID, when we were in the process of, do you remember early in COVID, Grace, whenever we had to like wipe down all of our groceries? Mm-hmm. That level of anxiety was really tough for me to manage. And just having that additional support, having someone just once a week, every other week, knowing that I had that time to really focus on being well, that was really important to me. Other things that are available, other services, of course, financial, wellness, health and wellness coach. The dietitians over there are fantastic. Exercise specialists, an elder care specialist. And if you're looking to quit smoking, there's a tobacco cessation specialist as well. And we're often referring our students, if you're in student services, to the VIP center, but they also serve employees. And so if you are experiencing violence, interpersonal violence, or know of someone, that's a great resource to continue to research and see how we can help. A relatively new offering from HR is well-being days. And I hope that the employees online today are taking advantage of those. You get 2 well-being days that come out of your TDL bank every year. Those are getting ready to get, I think, renewed in the new year too. And you can take them in 4-hour or 8-hour increments. And it's a sneaky way in some ways to use your TDL as vacation, but it's really for mental health. So if you need the day to take care of a pet appointment or to go to Keeneland for your mental health, then that's okay too. But there are certainly times when folks feel like they can't really call in sick, but mental health time or well-being time is more appropriate. And that's certainly an option for you.